This is the Week in Sustainability from Sustain.Life. It's where our team of sustainability experts and practitioners share commentary to keep you up to date on developing stories and news.
I am Nick Sontag, Senior Manager for Sustainability at Sustain.Life.
Hi, and I'm Constance, Director of Sustainability.
This week, we have two topics for you. We want to talk about the climate impact of AI, and also we have a little bit of an update with the Supreme Court and some oil company lawsuits. So AI, I think is, it's obviously all over the news these days with progression of Chat GPT and similar models. And of course, when we think of being on the cutting edge of technology, it's hard not to think of the Supreme Court.
Yes, cutting edge stuff. So since SCOTUS appears to be in hot water quite a lot these days, I'm almost afraid to ask, but what is going on now?
Yeah, I don't blame you for being apprehensive, but this week we actually got some positive news for those of us that care about climate issues. So this week, the Supreme Court declined appeals from three oil companies, ExxonMobil, Suncor Energy, and Chevron. And they were appealing for lawsuits that they're facing to be moved from state courts to federal courts. So these companies are facing I think they're facing dozens of different lawsuits, but this decision was in relation to five individual lawsuits that they're facing from the state of Rhode Island and the municipalities in Maryland, Colorado, and California and Hawaii. And basically, we've touched on this topic before, but the lawsuits are claiming that these oil companies misrepresented the dangers of burning fossil fuels, and in doing so, violated consumer protection laws. So many of these municipalities are actually just seeking to recover money for climate-related disasters.
Yeah, really interesting. I do think we need to celebrate this as a little bit of a win. I actually remember discussing one of the earliest climate cases in an environmental law class years ago, and that was the Alaskan village of Kivalina, the ExxonMobil. And that suit was actually dismissed by a district court because they considered greenhouse gas emissions to be a political issue that are to be addressed by Congress and not a legal issue. So I think filing these cases at the state level seems like a promising strategy. Can you share a bit more about the significance of this?
Yeah, totally. So in appealing to move these cases from state to federal courts, these oil companies are basically trying to get a repeat of that case, of a district court possibly dismissing it or being incredibly lenient with them. So it's generally accepted that a state court is going to be more strict and lead to like a higher damage rulings for the plaintiffs. So as a result of these cases, this change of venue being denied by the Supreme Court, not only is it a significant blow, but now these oil companies are going to have to face local juries in these jurisdictions, possibly made up of people who have directly experienced climate-related disasters.
Yeah, that's definitely scary for the oil companies. This also feels like a really stark contrast to the Supreme Court's ruling last year, limiting the EPA's control over power plant emissions, which is something the Biden administration is challenging again this year. I don't think any of us expect a change of heart on climate change and emissions regulation in general from this court. So what's the likely explanation for this ruling?
Yeah, this is definitely not an indication of any kind of change of heart or, different interpretations when it comes to climate-related lawsuits or these lawsuits in particular. When thinking about the Supreme Court's views, this is really more of a procedural ruling. And so since Supreme Court's views probably haven't changed that much from last year, it's probably in all of our best interests that these cases stay at the state level.
Yeah, good point. But all in all, it sounds like pretty good news. So maybe let's move on to a completely unrelated topic, though one that undoubtedly also faces a few court battles in its future. So the global warming impact of AI has gotten quite a bit of coverage lately. What do we know?
Yeah, so the MIT Technology Review published a number recently estimating that a single large model like Chat GPT can emit over 500,000 pounds of CO2e, which is equivalent to roughly what several hundred acres of trees would sequester in an entire year. So these models are, as we know, they're really large. we're moving in a direction of the models becoming larger and larger. That's seeming to be what's really, really successful these days. And so the impact is only going to increase when it comes to the training of these models.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. I think I've just read that emissions from AI across all sectors are comparable to those of the aviation industry. So you've mentioned some of it, but what else is behind all of these emissions?
Yeah, so these model developers are just going bigger and bigger and bigger, which means more data and more computation. So Chat GPT, for an example, has 175 billion different parameters that it needs to fine tune when it's being trained. And so those are all individual numbers, and they all require, a significant amount of computation in order to fine tune. The estimate is that like Chat GPT, a single training run can take weeks. So when you consider that all of that training is happening in energy intensive data centers, the numbers really do start to add up quite quickly.
Yeah, large numbers for sure, which kind of echoes a little bit of the criticisms we've recently heard about Bitcoin mining too, and the amount of energy they consume. So what are some of the solutions? I mean, can companies just move their training to data centers that run on renewable energy?
Yeah, performing your training in cleaner data centers or cleaner geographies is definitely a big part of the solution. It's one reason why Montreal, for example, has become a hub for data centers in North America, because there's a huge surplus of hydroelectric energy there. But the energy consumption is only part of the equation. Data centers also have a huge embodied energy and embodied carbon from the manufacturing of the chips that they're running to actually perform the computation. So as businesses develop more and more models and the demand for these larger and more higher performance data centers increase, thus does the production of chips.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about specific things that these model developers can do beyond moving their training to lower impact locations or geographies?
Yeah, one thing I thought that was interesting was that within academic communities, what gets talked about a lot is like the environmental benefits of making your models less proprietary and more open source. By doing so, you allow people to actually adopt your code or simply learn from training that you've already done, so that they don't have to train as much. But given that these large models that we're seeing now are coming from the private sector, it's a big part of the proprietary value and intellectual property of these companies. I don't see a shift away from the current model happening anytime soon. What we have heard people talking about is people have been calling for a federal body to oversee and regulate the development and use of AI. And this type of body could also develop rules for the emissions impact of AI.
Yeah, it's really good info. It'll also be interesting to see if AI can ultimately sort of compensate for most of its impact through emissions reductions. We're already seeing some of this, with self-driving cars having the potential to reduce emissions by 50% just through route optimization. There have obviously been some significant agricultural efficiency gains by deploying AI. But we'll see how that goes. But of course, emissions aren't AI's only environmental impact. There are issues around water, around lithium, environmental justice, and others. So maybe food for thought for another episode for us, perhaps. But for now, we thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next week for more stories in sustainability.
Sustain.Life is a sustainability management SaaS platform with deep carbon expertise that helps future-proof small and medium-sized enterprises by taking climate action. Go to Sustain.Life to learn more. Thanks for listening and watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel or your favorite podcast platform. We'll see you next week.